guys? Evening, and welcome to another episode of the Racing Line podcast. Tonight we're going to be talking a little bit of MotoGP, a little bit of IndyCar, and then even though there was no Formula One racing this week, guys, there is a little bit to talk about in silly season, and it's definitely relevant to us because it's pretty much all Australian.
Aussie on Aussie hate crime.
Yep. So we'll get into a little bit of Formula One as well. This is, episode 47 of the pod now. So getting close to our magic half century, which is going to be a big deal. But before we begin, let's start with the usual niceties. Joe, Harry, how was your week, boys? How are we going?
Yeah, good,
Just
mate.
surviving, mate.
Just surviving. Joe, online.
Just surviving.
With the
spicy
COVID.
cough.
Yep. Trooping along.
Mate, this is the good thing about having a podcast that's over the internet, because you can self-isolate and still partake. You know,
You do look a little bit under the weather.
well, I am a little bit under the weather, but it's all good.
Yeah, fair enough.
I've had a good weekend.
So let's jump right into it, boys. The first topic of conversation tonight has to be the MotoGP race that took place at Silverstone last night. If you haven't watched the race, we'll just give you the top three, which was Pecco Bagnaia, who continues his trend of winning or binning, and this week he was winning. Maverick
I like
Vinales
that.
taking second place for Aprilia, so we were able to finally see a little bit of consistency from the whole Aprilia stable, and it bodes well for the team considering that Maverick is able to perform as well on the bike now, not just Aleix. And then in third place and continuing his run of podium form, even without the wins, was Aussie Jack Miller. So interesting results, good results. I think Quartararo ended up finishing, might have been eighth, which was a little bit of a swing against him in the championship, but it's still pretty comfortable. And then just in relation to the championship chase, second place, Aleix Espargaro, I want to say he finished in fourth.
He finished ninth.
He finished ninth.
Yep.
Oh, there you go. I was wrong about that.
Stop picking him. You're putting the jinx on him.
I didn't.
No,
I picked him.
he had
I
a
picked him, but I didn't. I picked him and didn't realize that he had bloody 2 broken ankles.
He had a massive high side. I have not seen a high side like that in a long time.
Joe, you know what it reminds me of? The high side of Lorenzo back in the day at the wet Donington circuit, maybe 10 years ago.
I can't say I remember it, to be honest, off the top of my head.
If you looked it up on YouTube,
it is such a vicious. It's such a vicious accident.
It's amazing that he raced.
If you see it, it's amazing that he didn't just race, but was in the pack. I mean, where do we begin? All right, let's start from this. So the race was such an intense race that the top 10 bikes were within 6.5 seconds of each other by the time the race finished. It was pretty much it
was a sprint.
Yeah, it was a 20-lap sprint, but it was pretty much a train the whole way. I think last week, if you had asked me who would have won the race, I would have said Quartararo hands down. And I would have said that only because by the way he looks this year on the bike and the way that bike, which is similar to last year's bike, is performing, I would have thought he would have just taken off with the race like he did last year. I thought even with the long lap penalty, I thought that his Yamaha would have sort of made light work of all the Ducatis and Aprilias through the sort of twisty corners where that Yamaha really excels. And I mean, from the get-go, you could tell it wasn't going to be like that at all. One thing I was thinking while watching the race was, I think this is the moment in the season really where we can now see that new Ducati.
The reason why they went with
the reason they moved on from it. I think we're really going to see that now. And I think the problem that we saw in this race that Quartararo is going to face is, if that is true, there are so many bikes now that can get between him and Pecco if the Ducati suits a track, that points number can drop really quickly. Like now, I think between him and Pecco, it's 48 points. So that's not that much really. And I mean, the onus is still on Pecco. He has to keep winning. He has to keep actually finishing, staying on the bike. But this race in particular, I was like, man, if Maverick has found a bit of form, if the Ducati bikes are getting to a point where the riders are more comfortable with them, and we saw that Miller was saying how much more comfortable he is with the bike now, even though Zarco crashed, pole position, which he hasn't done very often. Martin looked really good on the bike this week. And then even I noticed Bastianini's older Ducati is getting upgrades that the new Ducati bikes are getting, because he was running the same re-fairing on the back seat. I think they're calling it the hedgehog or something, because it had like some horns sticking on the back of the tail. So I thought it was a really telling race for the coming season if what we're seeing comes true.
Do you think that like we spoke before the winter break, saying that essentially for this championship to reinvigorate itself, we need a few races where Bagnaia wins the race and there's a bit of a filibustering that goes on behind him before we get to Quartararo. And we essentially saw that this week with a first and then Quartararo finishing in 8th. Does that, with a 49-point differential between the two of them and just under half a season to go, does that open up the season again? Because I'm pretty sure going into the second half of the season, the difference between the two riders might have been pretty similar last year until the Mazzano crash.
I think what's different to last year, I think 100%, but I think what's different to last year is that there are just more bikes that can get between them.
That's right. That's a strength for Bagnaia, right?
Yeah, so I think Yamaha really have their work cut out to actually bring updates to this bike, this season, to keep moving it forward. I mean, the hardest thing for Yamaha is that they've only got one competitive bike. There was no more. I think the next Yamaha was like in 14th at the end of that race.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely put all your eggs into one basket. But when it comes to even testing out parts for that bike, it's going to be a very hard slog. And I think, I hope not, but I honestly think Yamaha will just put the ball in the court of sort of Quartararo's brilliance and hope that he can sort of pull one out. Like if he wins this season, it's going to be an amazing achievement again. But like you would definitely hope that they're going to bring a gun to this gunfight, because Ducati's pulling out all the stops. They're doing everything in their power to get this this bike into sort of fighting form for the end of the season.
What we are seeing, what I saw yesterday was that even amongst all the Ducati riders, Bagnaia, Miller, Bastianini, and Zarco, and even Martin, to be honest with you, they were all firing yesterday.
They were all firing. The only person who could get into there was Vinales.
So if they are able to continue the trend of strong performances together, well then they're like, I mean, crazy as it might seem, with one fall from Quartararo, this season is back within a race win.
Well,
which is crazy.
The funny thing is that there's probably still no pressure on Bagnaia, because he's probably still far enough away that if he was to fall in another race, like I don't think it would hurt him that much, like in terms of his in terms of how he's feeling. But there would be a lot of pressure on Fabio, especially now. He's pretty much lost, I think, 45 points in the last two races. Like realistically, that's a massive amount of points to lose. That's the worst way to go into the break, and probably even worse way to come out of the break.
Well, you come out of the break now and there's definitely pressure back on. And the crazy thing, like, I mean, I'm looking at the standings right now, and if you were to talk about this season, or the story of the season so far, it would be one based on looking at the points of dominance by Quartararo. But the reality is, 4 of the races have been won by Bagnaia. 4 of them have been won by Bastianini. and sorry, 3 of them have been won by Bastianini, and 3 of them have been won by Quartararo. So at this stage,
And
to
one
the
by
point,
Aleix.
and one by Aleix. So to the point, and one by Oliveira. So to the point being made by you earlier about consistency, this has been a championship more of consistency than dominance for Quat at this stage. So I think there's still more than enough races to for Bagnaia to pull back the championship, particularly if there is, as we saw in yesterday, the chance for Ducati to stretch their legs. In saying that, Silverstone, just due to its very nature and the length of a number of the straights, that does very much suit the Ducati. So I would like to see.
Last year they got smoked by Quartararo. That's the part that for me is really interesting. Last year Quartararo won Silverstone easily, because even though the straights are relatively long, there's so much curvy parts, the whole Maggots and Beckett section, and just the pace that he can carry through the corners, sort of last year, the pace he could take through the corners helped him onto the straights where the Ducati sort of had to stop it and then pick it up and then go. But this weekend, I was honestly surprised how not even that they stayed ahead of him, but that by the end of the race, it looked like their tire wear was better. They actually gapped him. All the Ducatis that were left in the race, and then it wasn't even just the Ducatis. Then we saw, I think it was Oliveira come past him, Rins was past him, even Aleix on the last corner of the lap dive bombed him to even try and get him as well. So.
Can I ask what
Very
did
interesting.
what did qualify this race?
Who?
Quartararo.
I think 4th.
That's going to be the biggest thing. I think that's going to be the biggest story for this season. I think if we see,
but he got to the second off the start.
If he's able,
serve his long lap.
If he's able to, get in the lead, I still don't doubt his ability to see out the race from the lead. The issue for him is going to be if he does get mired in the pack. Movement past the Ducatis, even the KTM yesterday was difficult for him to get past of Oliveira, but movement particularly past the Ducatis and the Aprilias, with the limitations of the Yamaha, is going to be hard to do. So I think qualifying will be the story of the season to see how it plays out. And interestingly enough, Bagnaia needs 8 points from every race to bring the championship
ahead
back.
of him.
Yep,
that's a win.
It's 7 points for a win, I'm pretty sure. So, if he's able to put together a charge, well, he needs to win, that's the thing. But if he's able to put together a charge and he gets a few favourable races where Quartararo falls or whatever it might be, then I don't know, I reckon the season might be back on. It's definitely a good sign. The last 2 races in MotoGP have kind of brought the championship back into something of a contest, which is really interesting.
I think 3 races ago I said it was chalked, and now I'm not ready to say that anymore. As the pendulum is swinging. One thing I also wanted to bring up was Maverick. I mean,
that has to be the talk of it.
That has to be the really the rider of the weekend, even though he didn't win. And I was wondering why he had such a bad start, and apparently his launch device didn't engage at the start of the race. That's why he started second and got dropped back to 6th. So he wasted a lot of time having to come back through the grid. But that not Yamaha, that Aprilia, with the way that it uses its tires and the way that he looked at the end of the race, I reckon if he hadn't had that launch problem, and he's had that launch problem like 2 races in a row now. If he hadn't had that problem, I think Maverick's back. And I mean, that only makes the rest of the season more interesting. And then even probably,
I don't think he's back for this season. I think
not to win, but like just to throw himself in the mix, just to get in people's way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great for Aprilia if he can find this form and then take it into next season. You'd probably say that they could be favourites for a team's championship next year if their 2 boys are performing like this by the time the season ends. But I mean, I think this is what most fans have been waiting for from him for a long time. and I was sort of preaching patience at the start of the year when you're a bit impatient. But I think now he's really gelling with the bike. This is his second podium in a row as well on that bike, and it was a hard race to be consistent, and that was a really hard race for anyone involved. And for him to move through the grid like he did in the last 5 laps, I think he was sitting like fourth or fifth with 5 laps to go, and he's just started dicing through bikes. And then even how he took Miller, I was very impressed.
I think what we've seen is a bit of the mongrel back. Like, I think we lost it for the longest time, and we almost just had someone who was at times seemed like he was going through the paces, and it wasn't really showing the potential of the man. But I think like I was listening to a podcast at the end of after the winter break, and it was saying that for Aprilia to really make the step that it needs to be taken seriously, we need to be able to see someone else do well on that bike, because even with Aleix being as old as he is, Aprilia needed some vindication that it was the bike. It was more than just the rider gelling with that particular bike. It needed to be, comparable on two different bikes, something that we can see on the Ducati, something that we aren't seeing on the Yamaha, something that we haven't seen on the Honda for the longest time. So for Aprilia also to finally see some, like both riders within their stable being able to see success, and particularly for Maverick to pick up the gauntlet and run with it when Aleix was injured, bodes well for, number one, the formula they've got working with that particular bike, and the trajectory of the team moving into next year. And I think that has to be what the team's considering, because it's really, it was really good to see. I mean, apart from the win, and I don't know, it was interesting because I picked up the race at the end, and I saw that there was like a warning sign or the exclamation mark next to Bagnaia on the last lap. I don't know if there was an incident between him and Nakagami.
No, he had I'm pretty sure he just had track limits warnings.
Oh, I see. Okay. And I
think that
thought
was just through the race.
There might have been a penalty that was incurred, but no, it's really good signs for Aprilia, great signs for Maverick. And I mean, he's still that's the thing we forget, is that he moved from Moto3 to Moto2 into MotoGP at such a young age. I mean, he's still relatively young. So this should be when this bike comes into form, and it should come into form next year as a title contender, he should be the one leading that charge, not so much Aleix.
I mean, that's
form's good to find.
That's the crazy thing. We forget that he actually is he's of that level of Bagnaia and Quartararo on his day. And like we always say that his high is probably so much higher than Aleix. He just needs to be comfortable, needs to have an arm around him and sort of be supported. And I think Aprilia has really shown him patience, shown him time, put no pressure on him to perform. They've just let him
literally zero pressure.
No pressure. And Aleix having all this success has probably given him even more time to have no pressure, because they're getting the results that realistically the team needs, just to sort of, have good vibes, but not actually need Vinales to actually perform. So now that if he can actually start performing, all on his own, that's honestly just gonna bode so well for next year, especially considering they're bringing 4 bikes next year.
That was the point that I wanted to talk about next. So what does this mean for Aprilia moving into next year, when it seems like the consistency of the bike will be that much better, having the data from 4 teams? Who are the other 2 riders that are going there? Miguel Oliveira
and I think Raul Fernandez.
Yeah, so you're
going
to
have be Darren Binder, but
you're going to have 3 race winners in that stable on a bike that is awesome. I mean,
it's scary. It's actually scary.
Yeah. For teams like Yamaha, particularly Honda as well.
Look at Honda.
That have had, the longest run of success that was probably taken for granted just due to the skill of Marc Marquez. Getting back to the top of the leaderboard or back on top of the totem pole is not going to be an easy feat, and it's only going to be that much harder when you've got a team like Aprilia that is, embracing the expansion that we wanted to see from the likes of Aprilia and Suzuki over the last couple of years. So, I mean, MotoGP is losing Suzuki, but by having Aprilia firing and having them being willing to invest and kind of expand their team, I don't know if we're losing a whole lot.
No, I don't think so. I mean,
great.
I think Suzuki Rins this weekend looked really good. He definitely burnt his tires out mid-race and he faded at the end. So watching him, in the top fight for most of that race, I was actually sad that we are losing Suzuki. One thing I think that's becoming very, apparent is that the Japanese bikes or the Japanese manufacturers aren't pushing the innovation of their bikes at a rate that the Italian ones are at the moment. I mean, the Ducati, we've said it from the start of the year, is probably the best bike on the grid. Probably doesn't have the best rider, but is the best bike on the grid. And still, every weekend,
I think it's debatable that Pecco is the best. I think the debate can be made that he's the best rider.
Most consistent. But still, every weekend they're bringing new updates. They're bringing new bits of aero kit. Every bike's trying something new. Aprilia is doing the same thing. There's no taking it for granted. Yamaha's bike hasn't changed, so they're obviously we're going to try and do what we did last year because we've got probably the most consistent rider on the grid. I mean, Honda, their best bike wasn't even close to the action this race weekend. I don't think they flashed back to them once this race, which is a massive indictment of like the hole that team is in. And we'll sing in their praises at the start of the year.
I think what we will see, like Honda right now is a bit all over the place, but I think what we will see from them come the end of the year. Number one, I heard that Marc Marquez is potentially eyeing a return to racing
testing this year
to race the Valencia round this year.
No,
Why? Hear me out, so that he can get a feeling for the bike again, and then go straight into the Valencia test after the race weekend. Because from what I heard, Honda are worried that if he spends half the day testing the old bike just to give a validation of what the new bike feels like, it might be a waste of a day, and they don't have that time right now. So there's even talk that he might even do the maybe just the testing on the last Grand Prix at Valencia and sit out the race, but just to get the validation again of what the bike feels like, so that he can go into the testing kind of with the relevant information that he requires. But I think the other and probably the biggest story for Honda right now is that they're bringing in Mir, who's a world champion who won a championship purely based on consistency, and they might be bringing in debatably the most talented rider on the grid who hasn't won a championship in Alex Rins.
Rins is there. He's signed for LCR.
Well, that's what I mean. And Honda's bringing him in. But he's signed to a Honda contract.
Yeah.
So I think between the three of them, the feedback they'll be getting from the development of this bike will move exponentially quickly, because there's definitely from where they are now and where they have been over the last 5 years to the talent in their pool. It's not based on future projections. It's based on three riders that definitely have the pace. So, and it's needed, and I think Yamaha might be the ones left in the lurch, because even now they've lost Dovizioso after this race meet. They're bringing in Crutchlow, who, I mean, was a great racer, but he's definitely past his use-by date. So it's probably going to be more of the same for Quartararo in season 2023. But yeah, great racing in MotoGP, and I think the championship's back on, and it will give us definitely some more talking points for the rest of the season based on the trajectory of the last two races.
Quickly,
yeah.
Before we progress, I apologise for my lack of input. In anticipation for our friend Michael returning to the pod, I was waiting for him to paint me a word picture of the events of the weekend, but unfortunately he pulled out last minute, so I have no idea what happened.
Word picture.
A word, yeah.
I've never heard that before.
Haven't you?
No, I'm a fan though. I
was excited for the monologue.
Yeah, it would have been interesting to get his input.
We we didn't actually paint any picture of the race other than speaking in vagaries. I think that's probably why.
Yeah.
Sorry,
but
guys.
Then, that's all right. Michael does paint a good word picture. By the end of it, though, I feel like
that's all you can do. Though, if you haven't got the actual knowledge, you can just regurgitate what you saw on the TV.
But I think the interesting thing about those said word pictures, though, is that when you go to a gallery, and then at the beginning it's like, oh, these pictures, they're amazing. How are they painted, etc. And then by the end of your experience there, you're just kind of sick of pictures. I think that's kind of how Michael paints his pictures. I mean, by the end of the experience, you're done seeing such a picture for the next 20, 25 years. So
I was actually looking forward to him coming on, though. I was disappointed when he said no.
Yeah, I have to agree. Like, regardless of
such a Michael thing to do, though.
Yeah, but even regardless of his fickle nature in building us up to break us down, he still is a founding father of the juggernaut that is the Racing Line podcast. So
juggernaut.
To have him back
I miss having to defend Jack Miller, and he's only coming good when Michael's not here. Yeah. So it's like Michael knew.
You know what the interesting thing is going to be, but and I did have a conversation with our MotoGP correspondent about this. Next year, when Suzuki leave, he jumps fully into the KTM experience.
Dude, he's been a KTM boy. He's had like 2 wives for the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden now he doesn't have to cheat on one. He's just gonna have one to worry about.
But his full movement into the KTM experience now means that all the hate that he's given to Jack Miller, he will now have to defend.
You heard it here first. Michael's favorite rider is now Jack Miller.
Here's the thing here's one thing I'll say about Jack. I think even if you watch Jack this weekend, the way he played the team game this week was perfect. He even said it after the race. I'm not in the championship hunt. He goes, I was never going to do anything stupid to jeopardize Pecco's race. And he said, I was happy to sit behind him. He said, and then Maverick got me with 2 laps to go because my tires started to go. So I think when you have a rider who knows his role in the team like that, and he's going to a factory, that's the reason a factory team like KTM is picking him up, because this is a guy who knows the team game. He's actually been part of 2 of the more successful manufacturers, like back to back. He was part of Honda when they were the bee's knees, and now he's been part of Ducati while they're actually the bee's knees. So he can only take valuable information to KTM, and I think he'll be awesome there next year. He's like, now that he understands that bike, his the way he looks riding the bike now compared to the start of the year is night and day. Like it's totally different.
I think we might have been a bit harsh to him too.
Well, I was never harsh.
His history,
you were harsh.
His history's anyway, it doesn't matter.
Regardless, in the championship history, nothing wrong with that.
Anyway, but that's good. Hopefully we do get our valued MotoGP correspondent back on the pod soon to just to give us the insight that we've been lacking over the last couple of months. So let's move into our second talking point from the weekend, and it's probably been our kind of love affair of the last couple of months, and we've kind of tried to talk about it every chance we get, but IndyCar keeps coming back weekend after weekend. And for anyone who doesn't like IndyCar, who kind of keeps saying, why are these people talking about it every week? Unfortunately, Harry, it keeps delivering the goods. So until it stops delivering the goods, all we can do is talk about and reflect on those goods.
Yeah.
Now you're making a word picture. Now you're making a word soup. Too many words.
Mate, I was watching that race today and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was outstanding.
Well, before I take your reaction, because that's what I want, let's just paint a sketch. So if you haven't watched the race was won by Scott Dixon, followed closely by our New Zealander Scotty McLaughlin.
Australia, New Zealand killing IndyCar, by the way.
Yep. So 2 New Zealanders, first and second. Third place went to Was it Christian Lundgaard? No, Alex Palou.
Lundgaard. Oh, Palou and Rossi.
Palou third, Rossi fourth, Herta fifth, Lundgaard sixth. And in relation to the championship, if you've got interested in IndyCar and have been following it, the two key protagonists, Will Power and Marcus Ericsson, both had some late drama. Will Power finished in 11th, and Ericsson, I think, might have got a DNF with 2 or 3 laps to go. So, again,
have you seen the standings?
Yes, the complexity of the championship. Well, I think between the top 6 up to Palou, it might be 39 points. So going into the last 3 races of the season, because there's 3 to go, between the top 6, everything is still to play for. So H, I'll get your reaction first. What did you make of the race in Nashville?
Mate, firstly, that track, over a bridge, everything, insane. I remember when Sydney was trying to bid for Formula 1, I think it was last year when Melbourne was cancelled again. They were saying they were going to race over the bridge, and I was like, that'll never happen. But seeing it over the Nashville bridge was pretty epic. Some of those sectors in that track, though, they were trying to make moves, and it was so tight. They were just crashing. I lost count on how many bloody yellow flags there were.
It's pretty rowdy. I think the interesting thing was IndyCar there's a lot of street circuits. There's a lot of narrow, twisty. I wouldn't say that any part of that circuit was unfamiliar territory for any of the drivers based on what they've raced in this year and in previous years. But for whatever, the other thing to take into consideration, it rained pretty heavily before the race, and that's why the race was delayed. So whether there was a lack of grip that kept being underestimated, or whether, I think
that is the worst of the street circuits in IndyCar, though. Yeah. If you think about it, even think about Long Beach, I think was Toronto where we were before. There's a lot of 90-degree corners, but they usually, it's either a very wide corner coming into a narrow corner or a narrow corner coming into a wide corner. But I think a lot of the problems on that track, and I thought it was a great race, but I thought the incidents were getting ridiculous.
Lee Diffie said last year there was 9 incidents, so it's obviously got a history of...
Yeah, so it happened last year, it happened this year, but the thing is, it's always a really tight... It's a tight street coming onto another 90-degree tight street, and then there's also a bundle of tyres as well. So either try and push the fence back and give it sort of a bit of an arc, or don't use that corner, because I think it actually, I think this race, the spectacle of the race was hurt by the amateur look of some of the incidents.
I wouldn't go that far. I'd probably say that the race...
I didn't like it. I didn't like it that much of it today.
I think the nature of the track is difficult, and I think it was a perfect example of safety car breeding safety cars. And there was a number of it's getting late in the season. There's a number of people trying to make something happen this season. There was a number of people buried in the pack, whether it was Power or whether it was Grosjean trying to make, everyone, or Newgarden trying to push through. There was a number of drivers out of position that were definitely forcing the envelope. I think the safety cars just kind of exacerbated their antsiness, and they thought, I've got to make the moves now to get back to the front. And what we ended up seeing was just a little bit of, it was amateurish, but at the same time, I love how raw the racing is, and I love how just through the very formula of the sport, these kind of passing in a racing category is still accessible. And I think the other awesome thing to see was when these overtakes were happening, going into the next corner, you had the car that was overtaking on the inside, the car that was hung out to dry on the outside, and both of them were drifting, trying to get on the gas to kind of hold position, or to make, it was just, it's so gnarly. But
that's all well and good. But
your ping is so bad right now, mate.
I said, well, that's all well and good. But when you have 2 of your sort of championship favorites impacted in the same incident, you have Pato O'Ward's gearbox break, and then he hits Will Power, who then has problems with his car as well from the same incident for the rest of the race, because the cars actually can't fit around the corner quick enough, so they just stop, and then one guy hits him at the back. I feel like that is not a good look for the sport. And yeah, when the racing was good, when the racing's good, it's good. But I feel like more so than any track, except maybe the last corner at Long Beach, there was too many corners on that track that were just too tight, way too tight. Because these aren't Formula E cars where they can't, like, Formula E cars can't really fishtail and shit that much. Like it's a totally different power output.
I think if you were to look at the track silhouette of Long Beach, you'd probably wonder why the track was the shape it is. And if you saw it, you'd probably say that looks like a pretty crappy track.
It is a crappy track.
But with that initial thought in mind, the spectacle that it gives, the overtaking that still occurs, there's something to that track that isn't.
Which Long Beach?
No, Nashville. I don't think it was nearly as bad as you thought. And to be honest with you, you're going to have some races. I mean, there probably was a little bit too many crashes, but just as much as good racing attracts new fans to the sport, carnage does too. And I think this was probably an example of a little bit of carnage, and I feel like you always need crash highlights for your end of season review anyway. So
but there were shit crashes.
This will be the.
But I don't think it's even the severity of the crashes or whatever. I think it's all those incidents kind of bring the field back together, and it's they're still racing for the win on lap 80 of 80. Do you know what I mean? Like, they were half a tenth less separated at the finish line. Awesome.
It was a close finish.
The other thing is, going into this race, there was still mathematically a very good chance for 9 or 10 of the drivers to make a push for the championship with 4 rounds to go. And again, 4 rounds is not a lot. And everyone was no one was settling today. And I think that was the first time this season we've seen, everybody that can make a push, do everything they can to make the push. And I think that just leads to tight racing, and people will make mistakes. I mean, Newgarden made a mistake with Grosjean. We saw the 2 Andretti guys go a lap down in the first 10 laps and somehow come back to finish 4th and 5th. I mean, it was just a race where everyone was pushing to the maximum because the championship's coming to an end. And I think one of the things that's a really nice picture of Joe. I think one of the things that has to be considered in IndyCar, just due to the nature of the short calendar relative to something like Formula One. 16 races is not a lot by current calendars. So every race counts.
That's kind of my point, I guess, that Will Power can't afford many more weekends like this one where he's mired down in 10th or 11th because Scott Dixon 6 points behind. Mate, it's going to go right down to the wire, but he cannot afford another weekend like this one, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, I think the good thing for Will Power is traditionally Penske are very strong at the next track, which is Phoenix for the Bommarito 500. Traditionally, they've been very strong there. Ganassi are traditionally quite strong at the Laguna Seca race, which is the last race of the year. And Portland is a little bit of a unknown, which is the second last race. So I guess, he had an ordinary race, but his recent trajectory before this round was pretty strong.
Is that Will Power?
Yeah, and I'd probably back him still to take out the championship. But it's good, definitely. I do. I back him to take. I think next week.
Dixon 6 points behind.
Yep. I think I've still got.
I wanted to take it out.
But... Well, if you're saying the next track is a Penske stronghold kind of thing, then it would make sense that he pulls out a bit of a lead on Dixon.
Well, Penske have been pretty strong on the short ovals this year, but even traditionally over the last couple of years. So I would expect them to be pretty dominant next year. The other good thing, I mean, actually the amazing thing about both the two front-running teams, Penske and Ganassi right now, is we saw for the majority of the race, all 3 of the Penskes and all 3 of the Ganassis in the top 8.
I mean, how good was Scotty McLaughlin this weekend?
He was awesome. I mean, he got a little bit unlucky just with all the safety cars. He really did nothing wrong himself. But that's probably an off-season conversation it's almost like he's done his rookie year, he's done his sophomore year, and he's kind of in a position now where I mean, even by his body language, I think his body language and his rhetoric in interviews, but also on social media, is now that he is an IndyCar driver. Yeah. He's not someone who's come from supercars to IndyCar. He's an IndyCar driver. And I think even today we saw when he does put the car in a good position in qualifying, and it's kind of, he does revert back to his natural climate of being at the front of a field. I mean, he's almost unstoppable.
That move that he made after the final safety car on, was it Palou?
Yeah.
Into that corner. Wow.
Yeah. He made a few good, like he put up a social today on Instagram of all his moves from the race, and he was killing it all race. I mean, I don't know. He definitely
put money on him next year.
Yeah, I think he's also kind of vindicated himself, because it's definitely a ballsy move to leave the surety of an awesome finish at supercars to kind of take the next step and go into IndyCar. And this year, I mean, he's got the most wins this year. No, sorry, second most wins. I mean, Newgarden's got 4, he's got 3, and it's his second year in the sport. So big things from Scotty McLaughlin for season 2023. But with 3 races to go, I think we can mathematically say now that the race is down to the top 6 being Power, Dixon, Newgarden, I think, Ericsson, Palou,
and Scotty McLaughlin.
Scotty's not close enough to.
Scotty's too far.
He's on 392.
There's 5 guys left.
Top 5. I think it might be something like 40 points.
The thing of Scotty though, Scotty can get himself in between Willpower and the chasing pack, or Newgarden and the chasing pack.
Yeah,
like that's where he's going to be a valuable asset, because he's got the pace to actually do it. So that's going to be interesting.
The point that I actually was going to make, and then kind of painted a different picture, was that this weekend we saw, obviously we have Newgarden and McLaughlin that are always performing for Penske, but we've seen over the last 2 races, Christian Lundgaard finished 3rd, and then he finished 5th or 6th today. He was coming 3rd for the majority of the race, but I think he's also kind of taken the next step as a rookie this year with Ganassi, and he can also act as a bit of a windbreak if Palou or Dixon was to kind of have a strong result and just steal a few more points from Penske as well. So, I mean, both teams have all their guns firing, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. And then also you've got those drivers like Herder, like Grosjean, like
Pato,
O'Ward now, Rossi. All of those drivers are just racing for, race wins at this stage. And they're just literally throwing caution to the wind. Like some of the moves that we saw today, 100% caution thrown to the wind, which was awesome. I think even probably don't need to talk about it, but the 2 rookies, Malukas and Kirkwood, up until they crashed into each other, I mean, even the young guys in IndyCar are killing it. It's I don't know how many times we can say it. If you're not watching it, there goes Joey. If you're not watching it, you're really missing out.
100%. I didn't really watch it before I got on the pod, I remember you talking about it and how good it was, but I was kind of like, it's at a stupid hour, I'm not going to watch it kind of thing. But now, I was at work and I was like, I have to watch it.
And it's at a stage now where kind of your elitism has washed away, and you're kind of just embracing the spectacle. Let's move into Formula One land, because it's supposed to be the off season. It's supposed to be quiet times in the pod, but we've had a bit of chaos, bit of Aussie chaos thrown into the European winter.
Aussie on Aussie hate crime.
Yeah. So what do you make of the whole Ricciardo Piastri fiasco? The Mark Webber fiasco, let's call it that, because he's the one that's pulling all the strings.
There's so many different angles, right? Nothing's been confirmed. The only thing that's been confirmed is Piastri's come out and said, "I'm not racing for Alpine." McLaren, I don't know if they're overcompensating, but they've been posting things about Danny Rick all week.
Yep.
Take that, as admin saying he's still our driver for the time being, or if it's them trying to overcompensate, I don't know. For me, looking at how well Ricciardo did in 2020 in that Renault, it wouldn't be such a bad move for him to go back to Alpine, be part of a constructor, started the this car. We know he can drive their car. I don't think it's such a horrible move. But again, we haven't heard anything from anyone. McLaren's not talking. The only thing Alpine said is Otmar has come out and said...
he expected more loyalty. That's what he said 2 hours ago.
From Oscar, but also when it comes to Danny Rick, that they would have no issue bringing Danny Rick back.
Yeah.
Even though we left him in 2020, or at the end.
Yeah.
I don't know, mate.
Yeah.
For me, it would actually sense Danny Rick. He got a 3-year deal at Alpine, and gets Oscar in a car that could potentially move up the grid. I don't know how much McLaren, how much upward trajectory they have, considering they're not a constructor. But Webber's obviously got his little, plan of where Oscar's going to end up.
I think to be honest, I think it's actually a good thing for, like, if it is to play out the way we expect it to, with Piastri going to McLaren and Ricciardo going to Alpine. I think the best thing for Ricciardo was that he didn't burn any bridges when he left Alpine.
Yeah.
And we saw him kind of maximize every result up until his final day there. So
he was so good that year, man. Like, he came 5th in the constructors. He was amazing.
Yep. So I think there's definitely there would be optimism from Endstone for him to return, because I still, he's still definitely got what it takes.
Hey, can we get that? I'm gonna soundbite that.
Well, for them, he does. For them, you've frozen on me. But I think he's definitely got what it takes. I don't know how it's come about with the whole Piastri situation. What that does tell me, though, is that any speculation about O'Ward or Herder having a history or having some kind of chance at McLaren goes by the wayside now, because they have moved to another young driver. Really? And I think the other good thing if Piastri goes to Alpine, straight away he gets compared with Alonso. But that's what we were all assuming. But by him going to McLaren, I think the good thing for him is Norris is going to be the obvious number one. And I think his recent history at the team would owe him that. But I think what it gives Piastri is it gives him a year to just be a number 2 and to learn. And there's no pressure on him. I mean, when you think about how Ricciardo's performed this year, you can't really get any worse than that. So for him, he goes in, learn behind a young guy, and then I think for season 2024, that's his real chance to take it to Norris.
But for me, right, and Alpine's a constructor, say what you will about their recent performances, that car's moving upward, we can see.
Yeah, it's definitely better than the bloody Stroll project. So
yeah, that too. But if you're Mark Webber, you have ties with Red Bull, obviously. I know he's got ties with Andreas Seidel, and that's where this could be coming from, the whole Porsche connection. But wouldn't you go Oscar into AlphaTauri for a year next to Pierre, and then Checo retires, or they move Checo on in 2024, and that's Oscar into the Red Bull seat? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, where's the option after McLaren? That's the
interesting thing for me is that I think for Red Bull, for them to do that kind of makes all the investment that they've put into their young drivers like Liam Lawson, up until recently Yuri Vips, all their Red Bull development. Potentially also, not. Potentially not, but if you look at the people that are running Red Bull, I wouldn't say that they're the most. I wouldn't say they're humble. You know, they've got a history of sticking to their guns and kind of trying to make it work with what they've got. So I just don't see how someone who's been developed by Alpine, raced with realistically the Ferrari team or Formula 2, how they're just going to kind of assume that when they've invested so much money into their own development infrastructure.
I just don't know where, like, yeah, McLaren's a legacy team. McLaren has the history, blah, blah, blah. Danny Rick's the only race winner in the last, 12 years? Like, where is Oscar's trajectory after? Because you move him out of Alpine, the constructor. You know, maybe the only other seat would be a Mercedes because, you know, their engine supplier, etc. But again, they've got their own driver program as well. So I just, for me, the move doesn't make sense for Oscar at this point in his career.
It doesn't make sense if you don't think McLaren can get back to where they want to get to. If you believe, like, if you think that they can bridge the gap to the front running teams, and they would obviously think that they can do that, and they would probably think that by having 2 bullets in the barrel of the gun as opposed to 1 as it is right now, that they can do that faster.
Do you think they can? In 2022, do you think McLaren has the potential to match it
2023?
No, but I'm saying as McLaren currently sit in the next 5 years, do you see them taking it to Red Bull, taking it to Mercedes, taking it to Ferrari?
5 years, I would be more confident. I would say that there's probably a good chance. I think the thing for Oscar that works well, though, is that he doesn't need them to be like that next year.
But I don't imagine they're signing him for a 2-year contract.
I don't imagine that he would sign for anything less than a 2-year contract.
That's what I mean. Like, that'll be a 3 or 4 year contract, I feel.
I don't know. I think 2 years will be what it is.
2 plus 1, maybe.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe a 2 plus 1. But I think it'd be probably a 2-year deal. And I think you'd also have to assume that there's been a pretty convincing discussion about where the team's heading. And you also need to take into consideration, I'm pretty sure that their wind tunnel comes online at the end of this year.
Yep.
Hopefully that expedites the development process of the team, because all their issues are still relating to the aerodynamics of the car. So there's probably a pretty convincing conversation taking place about that team. And there's obviously in the last, I made mention of it in our last podcast as well, but there was rumors about BMW potentially coming back to Formula One as an engine supplier, and a connection being developed with McLaren right now. In that regard too, if that's the projection that they're selling underneath the table to someone like Webber and Piastri, and there's some conviction to that development, then that's what they're selling, and that's kind of works. That works for me.
I think I'm hearing, and take this as you will, I think I know how you'll take it, but I'm hearing that Danny Rick, if he does go to Alpine, will have a clause in his contract if Mercedes come calling. Because apparently Toto has been seen talking to Danny Rick as part of a succession plan
for Hamilton.
For when Lewis retires. And that, I don't know. That's
well, I mean, he had one such clause when he signed with them last time as well.
Apparently Bottas was the option that Hamilton wanted because he felt less threatened.
Yeah, well, that makes sense too. Listen, I think that it works in the best favour for both.
Same.
I mean, I think it works out better for Ricciardo. The interesting thing will be for him, and this is where it could get tricky for him, if he was to go to RP next year and does not beat Ocon.
Because he spanked him, what was it? I think 15-2 in 2020.
Yeah, so if he was to regress and kind of was to lose to Ocon next year, I'm pretty sure that would be the end of the debate as it pertains to his demise. But in regards to having a fresh start, a team he's been at, a team he likes, they're on an upward trajectory, it has to be said. I mean, by the time we get to next year, there's probably a decent chance that Alpine and McLaren are fighting over the same real estate for fourth in the constructors. So that could be really interesting to see as well.
If they do if all this happens,
yep,
I'm here for Danny Ric being an absolute prick for the rest of the season and not listening to team orders and all that sort of shit.
But the problem is we've already seen he's played his hand in that regard, and he's a team player.
Yeah, but if you're not there next year, who gives a shit?
Well, you could have said the same thing when he left Alpine, but I don't think it's the way I don't think it's in his constitution to act in that particular way.
But the way this has been handled by McLaren could potentially leave him with some sour. I don't know. I just hope he just fucking does what he wants to do.
Yeah. But the other thing is, in order to play that game...
Yes. He needs to be closer.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like, you need to be there or thereabouts at least. So it's definitely interesting. I think it's spiced up the racing world a little bit. We saw Alpine. We saw Albon re-sign with Williams. I think that was a warranted and worthy re-signing for them. I can't believe he's still there for another year. I thought that there would have been other teams knocking on the door for his signature, but it's good to see that he's rewarded their loyalty with another season. They're obviously making improvements as well. But yeah, it's supposed to be the off season, and all we're getting is transfer rumors. So Formula One still on the back burner, still kind of giving us some goods.
Would you think that Alpine say to Fernando, take a seat for the rest of the year, and Danny Ric leaves McLaren now? No, don't think it'll happen.
I think because Alpine are probably in a position where they say if our car keeps developing the way it is, we have a chance at fourth this year. Because right now, you'd probably say fourth. That... Are McLaren ahead of them?
No.
Really? Well, then they got to fight. They got to fight for that then. So I don't think it's in their best interest to have both of the they're both driving well, Ocon and Alonso, and they want that. Money's money. Fourth place is still an improvement for them.
Can you see Alonso playing the team game, but now that he's leaving? I think that'll be an absolute nightmare.
Yeah. What I actually think will happen is Ocon will get schooled in the art of
shithousery.
old school racing.
Yeah.
I mean, he's gonna realize. I think what he's actually gonna realize, in saying that, Ocon in and of himself has got some thick skin. I mean, his years at Force India with Perez, if they showed anything, was that he can play the mongrel game as well. So we might have a spicy end to the season. The interesting thing will be to see if Alpine can actually contain it and control it, so that they can maintain that fourth place in the championship, because there is enough kindling there between the kind of relationship that's developed between those two drivers for it to blow up in their face. And by that face, I mean Alpine's, 100%. Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
All happening in the world of Formula One, mate.
Mate, it's all happening in the world of racing. MotoGP's woken up. IndyCar is still killing it. Formula One is just giving us some juicy gossip to talk about in the off season. But the great thing that we have is that in 7 days time, we'll do it all again, and we'll reconvene, and there'll be a little bit more juice for us to mull over.
Yeah, and hopefully we have some questions to debate, which will be good.
Yep, and hopefully we'll have Tristan back on the podcast to give us his much valued opinion. So I think we'll leave it there for tonight, buddy.
Yep.
Again, thanks to everyone for listening, participating. Interaction in the socials are going up ever so slowly, which is great. Downloads are increasing. So all we can say is keep engaging, keep spreading the word. We really appreciate it. And most importantly, guys, just keep enjoying the racing, because we're kind of spoilt for choice right now in the world of motorsport. So H, thanks for your time. Joey kind of got bounced a few minutes ago, but we thank him for his picture painting tonight in the MotoGP land. And we'll speak to you guys again in in a week's time. So have a great night.
See you, mate.